will wait here.
Good evening, everyone, and thanks so much for being here. I'm Pastor Jim with St. John's Lutheran Church, and we are thrilled to welcome Irene Miller here to share her story and to share some lessons that we all need to learn from. Have a couple of housekeeping things. Please silence or turn off your cell phones. And no photos or videotaping during Irene's presentation. She will gladly take a photo with you after. There is a book table in the back where you'll be able to purchase her book. And also we are taking up a free will offering tonight that will benefit the Zeckelman Holocaust Center. So without any further ado, we will welcome Irene.
I am one of the 10% of Jewish children who survived the Holocaust. Most of them are gone now. Though I can tell you only about my survival story, those of us fortunate to be left alive become also the voices of those who didn't live to tell their story. I was born in Warsaw, the capital of Poland. This is what I looked like when Nazis attacked Poland. My immediate family was made up of 4. Here is my older sister and I. She is here 8 and I am 3. And our parents. But we had a large extended family in Poland, numbering close to 100 members. When Nazis attacked Poland, it seems to me that Warsaw was under siege for a few weeks. Day and night, bombs were falling. We lived on the top floor of an apartment building where it was the most vulnerable place because bombs were falling through the roof and ceilings and into the homes. So with the cooperation of friends who lived on the second floor, we moved in with them. But even there it wasn't safe from the bombs. One night, a bomb fell into that apartment, exploded by the door, leaving the only way out was through the window. And that was the second floor. My father, who was a very tall man, knocked out the window and jumped, and he says we have to quickly follow him before the whole place gets engulfed in flames. He would catch us. When my turn came, I stood on the windowsill and looked down. It seemed so far down, I was scared. I just froze in place. My mother pushed me out the window. Somehow my father did not catch me. I fell on a pile of glass, cutting my arms and legs. When the family was down, my mother picked me up, carried me to a bomb shelter, and there she was sitting, pulling out shards of glass out of my limbs. These running to bomb shelters occurred over and over, particularly at night. At some point, we lost the water. A bomb severed the water pipes, and the only way we could get drinking water, at least, is running down the streets when there was still a functioning faucet. I remember where I was when Nazis entered Warsaw. I was in our own apartment. I don't know if it was the 4th or the 5th floor, but I was too high up to see the faces of the Nazi soldiers. They were filling the width of the streets, marching 10, 15 abreast. But strangely, I could see a reflection of shining boots pounding and pounding the pavement. You know how long ago that happens. When I speak at schools, I tell the students that happened not just before their parents were born, but probably before all their grandparents were born. Yet, There are still some sounds, smells, aromas to which I still now react emotionally. One such sound are low flying planes. Another one is a rhythmic pounding on a hard surface. I hear it and I tighten up. My parents felt that being Jewish, and also my father was the leader in the labor union in the Jewish division, they were open-minded people as such, and they felt that they would be among the first ones to be persecuted by the Nazis. So sometimes during the winter of 1939 and 1940, they sold the lease to our apartment, hired a Polish guide to smuggle us across the border into the Soviet Union. On one side, Poland borders with the Soviet Union. Why to go there? Because at that time, the Nazis were not there. And as you probably know, later during the war, they attacked the Soviet Union as well. And why to smuggle us? Because the borders were closed. The Soviets would not allow anyone to enter. I remember the last leg of the journey trying to cross the border. It was in the middle of the night, extremely cold. We were wearing layers and layers of clothing to keep warm and to minimize on the luggage. We were sitting inside a wagon of hay, the hay over our faces, over our heads, and over all that an old blanket. So should a Nazi soldier come across that wagon, he would not be able to see that there are people in it. At some point, the man, the guide who was told that he would take us across the border, stopped at one point. He said that we had crossed already the border and pointed where we were to take the train towards the city where my parents were headed, called Białystok. We huddled up for the remainder of the night, and when we woke up in the morning and left that secluded area, we saw thousands of people laying on the snow in an open field, leaning against bags, suitcases. This man did not take us across the border. He left us on the no man's land. My parents, of course, didn't want to go back to Poland from where they were trying to escape. My mother pulled out a blanket, spread it over the snow among people. People were sitting very close, one next to the other. She also pulled out a down comforter commonly used in Europe in winter. And this place in an open field in the winter became my home for about 6 weeks. My mother would repeat to me over and over, move, move. If you move, you are not going to be that cold. I moved as much as I could, and when I couldn't anymore, I would crawl under the covers. At some point, my feet got frostbitten. I had open wounds, was unable to wear my shoes. So my mother tore a garment and wrapped my feet in rags, and I shuffled around as well as I could. The only food we were able to buy was that which the peasant women from nearby villages would come after sundown and bring: bread, boiled potatoes in their skin, and sometimes farmer cheese, and charge exorbitant prices. The only fluid we had for drinking was melting snow. There were woods in the areas, and people were making fires to keep themselves warm and to melt the snow for drinking. Though I was a little girl, as you saw me, I remember many scenes from the no man's land, many scenes through the Holocaust, starting with the no man's land. But 2 images from that period are still vivid in my mind. I woke up one night, and there was a strange man next to me under the covers. I tried to push him away, but apparently I fell asleep. And when I woke up in the morning, the man next to me was dead. People were dying from diseases, from exposure, from starvation. And now the peasant women were also bringing shovels for sale. And the young men buried the dead in shallow graves. The other scene, I was standing with my mother by a fire, trying to warm myself up, and a young woman approached, holding a baby in her arms wrapped in blankets, and people assumed that she wanted to warm herself and her child, so they parted, letting her come close to the fire. But as she did so, a man looked into her arms and said, "Lady, your baby doesn't need warming anymore." The baby was dead. The man took the dead baby out of the mother's arm and proceeded where the Soviet soldiers were guarding the borders, and the crowd followed him. The man laid the baby in front of one of the guards, and the crowd started shouting and crying, let us in, see we are dying one by one." And that guard didn't say a thing, just kicked the baby back into the crowd. And like all other, it was buried there. Apparently, my parents concluded that they have to take some drastic steps or we are not going to survive just laying in an open field in the winter. One night, my father smuggled himself across the border. On the Soviet side, he bribed an official, give him a letter permitting the family to cross the border. But when he returned with that letter, the letter said he may take his children, said nothing about my mother, and the guards would not let my mom go. Our parents decided that my father should take my sister and myself to safety and see what he can do thereafter to save mom. We walked a whole night in the forest, and for me the pain was so extreme. The open wounds on my feet were wrapped in soft rags, and the earth was frozen and hard. But eventually we made it to the city Białystok. Around that city were clusters of Jews from Poland. We ended up in one such cluster, a wooded area with a lot of scattered little cabins. This must have been at one time the property of a wealthy landlord, and those cabins were for his workers. No furniture of any kind, just a few families on the floor in each small cabin. But after being for 6 weeks in an open field, laying on a wooden floor with a roof over my head, I probably felt like a queen in a palace. My father had no more money left, and also travel in the Soviet Union was forbidden. Only those who were big dignitaries or had a lot of money to bribe an official would be able to take a ticket and a permission to travel. So my father tried to reach the no man's land to save mom on rooftops of trains. He was caught by the police, put in jail for a few days, let out, and kept on trying it over and over. During all the time, when our father tried to reach the no man's land to save mom, my sister and I were left alone. Here and there a caring person offered us a meal, but I don't remember what and how we were able to eat beside that. Eventually, my father made it to the no man's land. By the time he got there, no one was there anymore. The Nazis came, took all the people, including my mother, put them on trains in direction to Poland and Germany. For a little girl to think that she might never see her mama was very difficult to understand and even more difficult to accept. Our father found some work in the city, was commuting daily by train. My sister and I were left alone. She, 5 years my senior, became my mama, and we managed as well as we could. Days went by, weeks went by, maybe more. Nothing unusual happened. Then one day, we were standing over a basin propped up on a low stool, trying to do the family laundry. What did I know, a little kid, how you do laundry? I spilled it on myself. I spilled it on the floor. My knuckles got bloody. My sister was angry. I was upset. Amidst of all the tension, the door to our cabin opened, and our mother walked in. Can you imagine my joy and excitement, but also confusion? I didn't know whether she was alive. It seemed it had been so long since I last saw her, and suddenly she appears. It took me a long time to trust that my mother will not vanish one day. Just as she showed up, maybe she would disappear. And I would wake up many times at night to touch, is Mama here? Well, we were happy now. We were together. And we were no longer hungry as we were under no man's land. Whatever our father was earning was enough to buy food. But the joy did not last for very long. We started hearing that Soviet soldiers were coming in the middle of the night and taking away all the young men. And no one knew what happened to these young men. And my father then was a young man. One day, there was a rumor that our cluster was scheduled for such a raid. So my mother took the train to the city where father worked to warn him not to come back until he hears from her. But she missed the last train coming back to us that evening. And that night, when my sister and I were alone, Soviet soldier kicked in the door of the cabin. They said, get your stuff. They gave us a few minutes to scoop up whatever we could, and they marched us to a train station where there was a long line of cattle cars, and they would shove in as many people as they could in each of those box cars. My sister and I cried and cried that we are not going to go without our parents, and the soldiers kept on telling us all kinds of lies. When the platform was almost empty of people, we saw from a distance a small truck and our parents on it. Was I happy to see them? I never asked, never found out how they heard about the raid, how they found transportation. All it mattered to me is they were there. And as soon as they arrived, they shoved us into one of those box cars. So many people in each of them that there was no room for anyone to stretch themselves on the floor. People were leaning against bags, suitcases, against one another, whatever they could. There were two sliding doors that were pulled together to close the boxcar, and on the outside, across them, a heavy metal bar to hold the doors in place. When we were inside and the doors pulled, it was so dark you could hardly see. There were no windows, no lights. This was meant for transportation of cows, horses, and so on. The only light was that which was coming between the cracks of the boards. Once a day, soldiers walked around with buckets of soup. Everyone was given a cup of soup. On the days when we were lucky, we got with it a little piece of bread. But those lucky days were very far apart. Most of the time, a cup of soup was the food for the day. Once a day, they let everyone out simultaneously under the train to relieve themselves. You know, it doesn't take very long. You forget about the notion of privacy. You do what you have to do. People were extremely hungry. Many were getting sick, and everyone scared and anxious, not understanding why the soldiers picked us up, where they're taking us, and what they would do with us. We were on that train for about 6 or 8 weeks, and then through additional means of transportation, delivered to a labor camp in the Siberian taiga. Taiga is a dense forest covering the northern part of Russia. Our little houses were right against the forests. Bears would come to the door front. At night, we heard Siberian wolves howling, and we were scared. We heard stories about wolves attacking people at night, that is in the dark. And in Siberia, in wintertime, there are only about 3 hours of daylight, and the rest is dark like night. And in the summer, it's in the reverse. Temperature would drop there to 50 below and lower. If a bird, for some reason, didn't fly away on time, it would freeze to the tree like a lump of ice. If you were outside with any part of your skin exposed, it didn't take more than a minute or two and it would get frostbitten. We did not have clothing for that kind of a climate. Everyone had to work. There was a cement factory, and some young men were sent to further clear the forest. My older sister, who was by then 11, turning 12, had to work as well. I did not talk to my children about my Holocaust experiences. I did not talk to anyone about it until a few years ago. There were people who worked with me for many years, and all they knew is that I was born in Europe. But my youngest child, Naomi, kept on asking me, and apparently I related some bits and pieces to her because I found in her high school writing a reference to 2 situations in Siberia. There was one store there, of course, the governmental store, and rarely would you go there looking for something that you needed in your daily life and you would find it there. But people frequented the store anyway to see what do they happen to have there today. But no matter what they had, everything was rationed, including bread. My mother sent me once to the store to get the family's rations of bread. Bread came in big black loaf, looking like mud, heavy like clay, sitting exposed on the counter, and the clerk in the store would weigh, in our case, what was the portion for 4 people. So I told Naomi that I was given a large piece, and with it a tiny, tiny little piece. And it took so much willpower for me to resist my desire of eating the little piece because I was very hungry. So Naomi said, if you were very hungry, how come you didn't eat it? I told her this was the bread for the whole family, and we had to wait until Mama divided it and let us have it. But no sooner did I hand over this bread to my mother, she took the little piece and put it in my mouth. At some other time, when it was my birthday, my mother said, let's pretend that there is no war. What kind of a present would you like for your birthday? And I told her a big loaf of bread, and that I could eat as much of it as I want to. And I saw tears falling down her face, and I had no idea what did I do wrong to make my mama cry. We were extremely hungry day in and day out. We were in Siberia somewhere between 2 or 2.5 years. And I remember one day I wasn't hungry, and I remember that day well. We were given a tiny little piece of land, and we planted potatoes. And my mother said, on the day we harvest the potatoes, we'll have one meal that you can eat as many potatoes as you want to. On the day we brought the potatoes from the field, the store had fresh herring. So my mother got one herring, cut it into little pieces. We baked the potatoes outdoor and ate them with herring. Oh, was that good. I don't remember how many potatoes I ate, but I remember a thought that stayed with me thereafter for a very, very long time. I thought, when I grow up, maybe I'll be so lucky that I'll become rich. Not a little rich, very rich. Then I'll be able to eat potatoes every day. I thought that to eat potatoes every day, you have to be either royalty or rich. You know, I'm neither one or the other, but I do eat potatoes. But no potato will ever taste as good as the one in Siberia when I was so hungry. From Siberia, they shipped us to Uzbekistan. Uzbekistan then was a southern republic of the Soviet Union. Now it's an independent country. I am sure that my parents felt that going south to a warm climate, life would be easier, food would be more available. But while we were very hungry in Siberia, we were almost starving to death in Uzbekistan. They placed us in a very poor farming village. My parents were not given any land to cultivate, and there was no way of finding work. My father walked from farmer to farmer, willing to do any kind of work in exchange for food. Once in a while, he would get a day's work, but most of the time not. There were stretches of time that we lived on boiled grass and leaves. My mother would go into the field, pick up anything that was growing wildly green, boil it, drink it first herself to see how she reacted to it. If she was okay, she would give it to us as well. There was another stretch of time that we lived on broiled onions. Some farmer must have had a good crop of onion, and in exchange for some of my mother's clothing or whatever, she got a bag of onions. We all came down with malaria. Malaria is such a violent, difficult disease. You would see a person one day, talk to him, he was fine. A week or two later, he was gone. I said, violent? I had malaria. Most of the time, the fever was so elevated that I wasn't conscious. But when I was, I remember screaming and screaming. My bones were breaking. No matter how many layers I had over me, I felt such a violent cold that I was shaking with. After recovering from malaria, I had difficulty walking for some time. There were some Jews from Poland in Uzbekistan. I don't know who they were and how they were able to do it, but they established orphanages for Jewish children from Poland and would recruit not just orphans, any Jewish child from Poland they could locate. It was simply an attempt of saving the children from dying of starvation. One day, a man came to our village, talked to our parents. Next day, he came with a horse and buggy. Our mother told us we'll go to a place, there'll be other children, food will be more available, and our parents, will visit when possible. I think it took us a few days on that buggy until we came to the village where the orphanage was housed. The orphanage was contained in one large room. From one end of the wall to the others, boards were ripped off the floor, propped up on stack of bricks, and girls were laying tightly on those boards, one next to the other, covered with old blankets, and their heads completely shaved. You remember the first picture of me with long braids? They shaved my head completely. Across the room, the same arrangement for boys, and their heads shaved as well. The caregivers shaved the children's heads because the sanitary conditions were horrible. I don't remember when and where I was able to take a bath or a shower. And they feared that under those conditions, the kids will come down with lice that spread diseases, and apparently lice nestle in hair. But we found out very quickly that lice nestle in all kinds of other places as well, because we were about 100 bald-headed kids covered with lice, covered. Lice are not larger than the head of a pin, but they can burn and itch your skin so badly that you are ready to rip it off. I remember bleeding all over from that intense scratching. And you know the strange thing, I will remind you again, you know how long ago that happened. The second I start thinking about the lice, my head itches so badly that I want to take 10 fingers and scratch it all over. It lasts a few minutes and it goes away. A few months after entering the orphanage, my father died. There was an epidemic of dysentery in the village my parents lived. No pharmacy, no physician. My mother walked the whole day to another community in search of penicillin. I don't know whether she obtained it or not, but when she returned, my father was dead, buried in a communal grave. My mother didn't even know in which one. The war ended in 1945, but I stayed in the orphanage in Uzbekistan, I think till almost 46. I don't know what was the reason we were unable to return sooner, but I had no other options but to wait. During all the years of the Holocaust, extreme hunger was a daily part of my life. And this is the kind of hunger that you cannot explain to another. You have to live through it to know the feeling of that kind of a hunger day in and day out. There was a lot of fear and anxiety, not knowing what will happen from day to day, not understanding what's going on. There was no newspaper, no radio. Of course, television didn't even exist. And if the adults knew anything, they didn't share it with our children. There must have been an assumption those are just little kids. The less they know, the better it is, but it worked the other way around. The less I knew, the more I was concerned, and the more I was speculating. But I tried to do everything possible to keep myself constructively involved. I learned to read myself when I was quite young, Polish, because Polish was my childhood language. While in the Soviet Union, I learned to speak and to read Russian. And I would read anything I could put my hands on in one language or the other. When possible, I attended a kind of a semi-school, but my educational opportunities during those years were extremely limited. The only place where I was expressing what I felt and what I thought was in writing poetry. I was writing poetry since I was a young girl. My home here in Michigan was hit by a tornado 1975, before many of you here were born. Half of the house ripped off and blown away, with it most of my belongings. A few years ago, I was looking for a book which I thought survived the tornado. To my great surprise, not only did I find that book, but in that book, I found one notebook of my poems from the orphanage. I had a tall stack of them, tightly written, because paper was very difficult to obtain, was very precious. All others were gone. This one notebook was left. The paper was so yellow with age that I was afraid to touch it, that it will crumble in my hand, but it didn't. And reading some of those poems as an adult surprised me that nothing in it looked like it was written by a child. Nothing cute, nothing funny, just expressing longing for normalcy. How wonderful it would be to live with my family in a small room, not 100 kids in one room. How great it must be not to be hungry. I'm sure I didn't remember what it felt. I just imagined. And to see my aunts, uncles, and cousins whom I loved so much. And poetically describing Poland. Poland to me was paradise on earth. But as you saw, when I left Poland, I was short of 6 years old. But when I returned to Poland with the orphanage, nothing of what I envisioned or hoped for became reality. I spent another 5 years in orphanages after the war. And the city where it was in Krakow. Anti-Semitism was still raging in Poland after the war as well. Quite a number of Jews had been killed by Polish people after the war, particularly in small towns. The tiny Jewish community that was left alive tried to do everything possible for us, the children who survived. The orphanage was for Jewish children, so was the school. The school was only in one room because a handful of us Jewish children were left in that city. And so were the caregivers. That school took us once to what used to be a concentration and death camp. In the display room of the camp was a tall pile of shoes, men's shoes, women's shoes, little kid shoes, shoes of those who were sent to the gas chamber to die. There was a tall pile of hair. Women who had long hair, they cut their hair before sending them to death, and they used the hair for various purposes. There were lamps with shades made of human skin. Soap made of human flesh. It took me an enormous length of time before I could take a bar of soap in my hand and not think of my aunts, uncles, and cousins. I told you earlier that my extended family numbered close to 100 members. Not a single one of them survived. Not a single one. For my mother to continue living in Poland, she felt like living on the graveyard of her brothers and sisters. She and my older sister, who was by then married, she married a boy from the orphanage, they decided that they can't live in Poland. They don't want to live in Poland. The only place they could go was to Israel, because the Israeli government was helping Holocaust survivors who wanted to immigrate there. I did not know anything about Israel. I was so eager to catch up with my lost education. I would work in 2 or 3 academic years in one calendar year. I was like a sponge absorbing information. But the ruling in my orphanage was that once I reached the age of 17, I will have to leave and take care of myself. I did not know anyone in Poland or any other place outside of the children in the orphanage. My mother and sister lived in the same city. Periodically, I was able to take public transportation and visit with them. And apparently, they provided some emotional support which I needed, because I did not have the courage to be left alone in Poland after they immigrated to Israel. So in 1950, I joined my mother to immigrate to Israel. This is my mother and I arriving in Israel. Israel was a different chapter of my life with different challenges. I did not know anyone in Israel. I knew I would have to work to support myself, and I was pretty sure I would have to support my mother as well. Though she looked fine, she was a sick woman. And I did not know the language spoken in Israel. But as you can see, I survived. I don't want to leave you with the thought and the feeling, here is this poor woman who had such a difficult life. I don't think of myself that way. Not only am I fortunate that I survived, that's okay, but more importantly, I am fortunate that I was able to create a meaningful life and significantly contribute to my community. This is what I looked like when I came to the United States. I was 21, 22 years old. I was married, had a little baby, and did not know a word of English. That was the third country I was coming without knowing the spoken language. Soviet Union without Russian, Israel without Hebrew, United States without English. But when I was young, I was picking up languages, what seems to be now miraculously fast. It didn't take me too long. I entered the University of Cincinnati. I lived in Cincinnati for about 16, 17 years. I earned an undergraduate degree in psychology, a master's in social psychology. A year or two later, I entered Xavier University, also in Cincinnati, earned a second master's, an MBA, with the major in hospital management. I had a rewarding work career as a healthcare executive, including for a year, I served on an advisory committee in Washington, D.C., a committee that dealt with women, children, and drug addiction. I am retired now, which means I work and I don't get paid. But I do things that are extremely important to me. My whole adult life, I tried to be guided by the Jewish ethical principle called in Hebrew tikkun olam. Tikkun olam literally means repairing the world. Implied in it is that we each have a responsibility to do everything we can to make this world a little better for everyone. How I do it is, first of all, how I relate to people in my life. I respect fully and equally every good human being. Doesn't matter what's the color of their skin. Doesn't matter what's their religion, poor or rich, or where they came from. They're good human beings. They have my full respect. I do as much as I can support organizations which worldwide work to alleviate hunger. I know what hunger is. I don't want any child in the world to experience what I did. I use my time and my skills to enrich the life of my community. I hope that one of these days you'll make a trip to the Detroit Institute of Art, the #1 art museum in the nation. And if you come there and see me, I will not talk to you about the Holocaust. I will help you to understand and enjoy art. Next year, I am getting my 25-year pin of being a docent at the Detroit Institute of Art. I'm a mediator in court, which means I help people resolve conflict without having to appear before a judge, and the decision becomes legally binding. I have been on the board of directors for more years than I remember. and the American Jewish Committee, which is the oldest civil rights organization in the United States. I do all those things as a volunteer. Of course, I study all those areas to be able to volunteer. But the most important thing now, my mission in life, is to use my Holocaust experiences to show what hate and prejudice did and what hate and prejudice can do again unless we learn from it. And to show you how a democracy fell from within. Since the University of Michigan published my memoir, and I will tell you a little more about it, you saw it outside there, I have been invited all over the country to go to tell my story and to learn people from it. The largest gathering was here in Huntington, Indiana, 1,800 students and teachers. And the newspaper wrote, you could have heard a pin drop. This picture was taken 7 years ago. And in November, I will be not just in that school again, but in other areas in the community. One of the students here, who is now a teacher, invited me to speak to his students. And I told them that I feel like a teacher seeing a student grow to productive adulthood. It will be a very special experience for me to speak in the school of that student. And also, that same school invited me, and in November I will be there at a university, 2 schools, and so on. By now, if I look at this pictures, it's sometimes difficult for me to remember where they were. I have been in many, many churches. And what helps me to travel all over, not just Michigan, but we travel I have been all over the country is, and I don't like to drive more than an hour. What helps me is my partner, Bob, who was outside. You met him already in the book, with the books. He goes everywhere I go and helps in whatever way possible because he believes that what we do is extremely important. He is so accomplished in that now that he earned the title of Director of Transportation and Logistics. So the Director of Logistics will help you with the books thereafter. And Bob probably remembers all the names. I know this was in Houghton or Hancock, 2 cities across the border, across a small river. And I think this is Department of Human Services. I'm not, whoops. Oh yes, the Knights of Columbus. They had a main event in the evening. I was a speaker, and the next day I addressed the women, yes. For a few years, I was a keynote speaker on Constitution Day in the courthouses and telling the students why I, a Holocaust survivor, was requested to speak on Constitution Day and mentioning the meaning of the Constitution. Usually, I speak to the total school body, and if the student body, if there are not enough room, they will sit on floors or stairs or whatever. And I speak middle schools, high schools, and universities because in aggregate, I think children younger than that are not ready. Individual, they might be, and if a parent brings a young child younger, the parent knows the child. But here was one time in Boyne City, I was invited there for other speaking engagement. The 4th grade teacher asked me, would I please speak to her students because they studied immigration. And look at all the little hands up. They had wonderful questions. Every gathering is extremely important, but somehow more intense it felt when I spoke to the military. I thought they carry an important burden and should know the message that I convey. This was Mississippi Stennis Space Center, where they test all the rockets, and this is Admiral Okun, who gave me a big plaque and bought my book. Yes. Not long ago, I spoke to another large military facility, and they gave me the great medal for whatever you call it. This was Habitat for Humanity. Here, we were a few months in Sault Ste. Marie. And as you know, Sault Ste. Marie is a very small community. Some schools don't have more than 50 students in total. But here was a theater with 700 or 800 seats, and every seat was filled because school buses were coming within more than a radius of 100 miles. The next day, in that same place, we had 460 adults. And I will mention that picture once again, but let's proceed. This was Notre Dame Academy, where the students, they always lined up to thank and express. I was honored with the award by was the Monroe Community College as the best diversity program of 23, and this is the president giving me the award. When I come to schools, I stress to the students that they were the future leaders of this nation and maybe beyond. It will be their responsibility, and the young people here who hear the same applies to them. They will be the future leaders, and it will be their responsibility to do everything possible to prevent such horrors from happening. And in order to do so, it is not enough to know what happened. They have to learn how those things come about. Hitler and fascism wasn't dropped upon us from the sky. It evolved. And we need to learn to recognize steps that lead to a totalitarian fascist system and leaders whose behavior indicate that they want to be totalitarian leaders. What started in Germany, and this goes on in every totalitarian system, is first of all feeding them misinformation, preventing the information of what goes on to get to the people. I am not sure whether it was Stalin in Russia or Hitler in Germany who was the first to refer to the free press as the enemy of the people. So it isn't just attacking the free press, but feeding people with misinformation. With the notion of restricting what people read in newspaper and media came also the notion which books are allowed to be read. When I hear of a governmental entity in our country deciding which books can be held in a library and which cannot, whether it's a school library or public library, I have the image in Germany of book burning. They were requested and asked to bring all the books in the center of the city, books written by Jewish authors, even the world-known scientist Einstein's, book written by those who did not support the system. Again, controlling what people know, controlling what people are informed of. Then finding a group of people as scapegoats. Everything that is wrong in the nation, to blame it on those people as scapegoats. It was easy for the Nazis to use Jews as scapegoats because anti-Semitism was deeply rooted in the Western world. And this scapegoating, this describing Jews in the most horrible manner started off from children's book. Children's book had Jews depicted as poisonous mushrooms, as this old, distorted man who was enticing young children with poisonous candies. And it was Hitler first describing Jews as poisoning the blood of the Aryans. Those are signs of a totalitarian system or leaders who want to establish a totalitarian system. This woman that in Sault Ste. Marie that I showed to the adults stood up with questions and tears flowing down her face, apologizing to me for what Germans did to me. First of all, I told her I appreciate her sentiment, but she's only responsible for her action, not for those that the Germans, her relatives, did. She was born in Germany, came to the United States as a teenager, and many years later went back to Germany, questioned how was it possible that this well-educated population, people, the scientists, artists, and so on, how was it possible that they allowed such horrors to happen? And the family told her, you know, we're people who don't like to get involved. You know, if we don't stand up to small injustice or any injustice, it means we accept it. And if we accept it, it enables the perpetrator to do more and more, worse and worse. Then we thought that those are only such small things. There is no such a thing as a small injustice. Because an injustice may be small to you, but it's very large to the person it affects. Then, when they realized what horrible things were happening, they were so afraid of one another that they didn't dare to do something. A powerful tool of a totalitarian leader and system is to make you afraid of someone who doesn't look like you, someone who doesn't pray like you or eat like you. It's we and the they become the monsters. The divisiveness that happened in Germany of saying be afraid, it became the same thing existed in the totalitarian Soviet system. Be afraid of your brother of that. You never know who might do something or tell someone that you are a lie of one thing or another. Yes. And I also stress to the young people, and this applies to all of us, I tell them, you know, before you become a leader, it will be your opportunity and your responsibility to select leaders who will lead you. And I am referring to the vote. And I said, there were hundreds of thousands of people in the world who gave their life for the right to vote. We have it. I said, this is your powerful tool. But not only do you need to vote, but you have to vote for someone who reflects your values. And of course, this applies to all of us. You know, Hitler was democratically elected and found supporters in all kinds of deviant ways to disregard the Constitution. And many democracies fall not from outside, but from within, of disregarding the Constitution and finding people who assist in this process. And my message to the student is, There, in addition, the social responsibility, but individually, there is no such a thing as a life going through with everything, just what's the expression, roses. There will be difficulty in everyone's life, and I tell them maybe there's some difficulty in your life as well. You have more strength in you than you realize. I wasn't born a superwoman, just a person like any other. If I could do whatever I need, you will be able to face if life brings some difficulties. At the same time, nothing wrong in asking for help. At times for each of us, there are times when we each need some help. And by the same token, we need to be always ready to give a hand to those who need our help. Yes. And I'm glad to see the wonderful reaction I have from students and how many of them ask what can they do to help in one way or another. What I told you is just a small element of the story. I hope that each one of you will read my book published by the University of Michigan, not just to know what happened to me and my family, but get a flavor of a totalitarian Russian system, which isn't much different than now, maybe different names, and to get a flavor of how it started with the German fascism. The book is not available on Amazon, so we'll always bring more. Bob has another box in the car because many people like to buy it as gifts. And I am not shy to tell you that yes, I do want you to buy the books because this is how we spread the story. And from what I hear from others, many said that they couldn't put the book down. The book is written in the way I speak of telling a story. But from what I hear, every time a book is bought, there is more than one person that reads the story. It always passes, and I have had some people who gave it to this and that, and they don't remember, and they email me to buy a book. Yes, the book can be bought on my website, but when I speak, the price is reduced to $15, and on the website it's $23. I know, and by the way, most schools that I speak in, they buy book as a required reading for either history or English classes. I know I threw a lot of stuff at you, so gather your thoughts and ask me questions. I welcome every question. If you ask me something a bit about which I don't have the information or feel it's inappropriate for me to talk, I will let you know. What I will ask you, please, there is only one other mic there. So if you can stand up and shout, I will repeat the question. And if you need a mic, someone will bring it here.
If you'd like
Yes.
to ask, I'll bring the mic to you.
I can hear this lady here. Did I mention in the beginning? Did you also have a brother? No, I didn't have a brother. I just had one sister. No, my sister lived in Israel, but she died about 4 years ago. And she had a very difficult life, emotion. She was depressed for many years. She was surrounded by a loving family, but emotionally her life was not easy. I'm up here so I can see you a little better. Yes.
I say this with all respect, and I know with your history that you told us tonight, how are you not 500 pounds by just not eating so? No, I say this respectfully.
How am I what?
How are you not a hoarder? I mean, because...
How am I? You can see that I still am watching my waistline, right? Well, I don't know. I am not. Let me just tell you. I remember years ago, You know, my work was very intense, time consuming and so on. And I would go shopping sometimes after work to a supermarket. And I would get periodically that, oh, I said, take a look at all that. I can buy whatever food I can. And I would have that, wow, I can buy whatever food I can. I am not a hoarder for food, and as you can see, I am not overeating. But I feed people whom I love. I am known as a soup lady among my brood. I have always something in the freezer that if a friend pops in, I can defrost it to do it. I have in my basement what I call a mini Costco. Something happened, I can feed my friends for a month with what I have in the basement. They would eat beans and a lot of brown rice and stuff like that, but we wouldn't go hungry. Yes.
You have 3 children, correct? You have 2 sons and a daughter?
Yes.
And do they live anywhere near Michigan?
It is very difficult for me to talk about it. Your question was fine. Absolutely no. Two of my children just live in my heart. It's okay, we can go on. I am okay. My son lives in Ann Arbor. My son is a clinical psychologist, a writer, an artist, and the most wonderful human being. And I am proud of him as a human being, how he is caring, sensitive to the needs of others. Yes. And in his office, my son's name is Dan Saferstein. And in his office is a large picture of me, of the first one that you saw here in the braids. He has it in his office. And he calls me every day. Very briefly, not a conversation. Sometimes he just say, Mom, I can't talk. I just called to say good night. I know it is sometimes difficult to come up with questions after I loaded you with all that information. And by the way, I'll be very glad to come to your children's schools, to your other organizations that would like to hear my story and learn from it. Yes.
What do you feel gives you your strength?
What gives me my strengths? You know, I have been asked in one form or another the question, how can I still be so upbeat? How can I be positive? What survived me? What helped me to survive? I don't have a clear answer. First of all, I have the assumption that some of us are born with a lot of energy, and I was born with one, and I still have it. I still put in at least 5 miles of walking daily. I walk around with a pedometer to count my steps, yes. And some of us, I think, are born with this zest for living. If anything that helped me and that I would advise to anyone in tough times, in the most difficult of situations, I would look for a grain of positivity. There is no situation in which you cannot find one grain, and I'm not talking of the glass half full, half empty, not half, just a little bit. Cling to it and water that grain. And in times, even after the Holocaust, in my most difficult times, I would look for some element of positivity. And at the same time, also find someone who maybe needs my help more than I need theirs. I would always find myself in situation when I came, and since you know that 2 of my children are not alive, I can talk more. When I went after all this thing, looking for a support group, for a grieving group, I found myself suddenly that I was helping others. And finding not just living in your own cocoon as a person, but seeing what others need and how you can be of help to others. And that for me is almost as of an inborn thing. If I see an older person can't bend down, I will pick it up. I don't think I will die. That's not the issue, but I will help. And there was some movie made about me. There is one called Irene, Child of the Holocaust, a PBS movie. I don't like it, don't recommend it. There is another one. There is another one, wonderful, not about me, but I am in it, called Shoah Ambassador. Shoah is another word for saying Holocaust. But Michigan Healthy Mind recorded me twice. Once had to do with mental health, and that comes up on Sundays periodically. But last year, they recorded me to, again, it's a half-hour show comes out, and it was called Getting Better at Getting Older. And they wanted to know all my secret, how I'm getting older, so great, whatever. And you know, the notion of not just living for yourself, but seeing where you can be of help to others is a wonderful feeling. To give is sometimes more rewarding than to receive. You know, I will stay here and see if we have some. Oh, yes.
So you're like 10% of the survivors. Have you ever met up with other survivors?
Have I met other survivors?
And talk about your stories?
Have I met other survivors telling their stories? Originally, when I started talking, I met a lot of survivors. They are gone now. They're just a handful. But I don't want to hear their stories. I don't want to read stories about the Holocaust. I want to get to know people as they are, but it's too close to home for me to dwell. You know, when I speak to you, I am not telling you a story. I am in a way reliving the story. But when I am not in that format, I am not thinking about the Holocaust. I live a normal life. I love to have good friends. I love good food. I love the theater. I love music. I love to travel. I live a fully normal life. But when I am in this mode, I relive it. And I don't want to relive other people's Holocaust stories. Yes.
Did you ever find out why you did not go to a concentration camp?
Why did I not go to a concentration camp? Well, when we escaped to Soviet Union, we were in a concentration. Oh, let me see if I understand your question. Why did the Russians put us in a concentration camp, is your question?
Oh, I just was questioning whether you in fact were in a concentration.
I was in a concentration camp in Siberia.
Oh, that was considered a concentration.
Yes. You know, when I will still wait a few minutes, when you guys sitting don't have question, I'll be there next to Bob, helping him with the books, and I'll stay for as long as you want to have question or want to tell me something about yourself. How many students do we have here, young people? Would you raise your hand who is a school student? Wonderful, wonderful, yes. But you know, I have a great confidence that you young people will create a wonderful future, that you will be the ones who will be open-minded, who will explore, who will stand up for injustice and so on. The future is in your hands. And you'll be the ones who will lead you, who will be leaders and then select people, good people who will lead you. If you don't have any other questions, I thank you for coming. I thank you for listening. And my best wishes to each of you. And I will be in the back helping Director of Transportation and Logistics with the books. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I just want to say when talking about, you know, Bob will sometimes say that I practice what I preach. And when I talk about respect for every human being, diversity, I am a deeply rooted Jew. I'm not saying a deeply religious, a deeply rooted Jew. Bob is a deeply rooted, very religious Catholic. We respect each other's religion because we view for the humanity in each of us. And I sometimes refer to him when I am in a Catholic school, when I refer to him as my good Catholic boy. You know, but for me, a good human being doesn't matter where the goodness comes from. It doesn't matter where the goodness comes from. Is it from religion or if it would be from another source, it doesn't matter. And I wish if we each could look this way, of looking for goodness, independent what's the source of it, maybe the world would be a little more in harmony. I thank you and my best wishes to each of you.